All right, so I already did a video on my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera rig, but I've been shooting more and more on my Sony, and so I figured I'd also do a video walking through my Sony rig. So the camera, this is the Sony a6400. This is a pretty old camera. I think it's like 5 or 6 years old at this point. I got this when it first came out. It's still a great camera though. It still holds up. I think the a6700 is the current version of this. You don't have to shoot on this camera. This is just what I have. You can cherry pick whatever bits you like. My lens here, this is the Tamron 17-70 f2.8. This is my new favorite Sony lens. This is like the perfect run and gun walk around lens. 17 is pretty wide. 70 is great for portraits, and then you get everything in between. So I never have to like change lenses when I'm doing run and gun. This is pretty much just living on my camera body. It's also image stabilized, so there's image stabilization in here, which is great if you're doing handheld. And then it also has a really close minimum focusing distance, so you can get right up on your subject and still keep them in focus. So for me, that's great because I do a lot of product photography, I do a lot of detail shots, so I like that I really just need one lens and it does all the things I need. I have it in a small rig cage with a small rig side handle. The cage has a rubberized grip on the front, which is great because then between the side handle and the rubber grip here, it's really nice to shoot handheld with this. I can still reach all my controls, change all my settings. Like, this is perfect for just doing handheld run and gun stuff for me. I have the small rig battery plate on here, and this runs a dummy battery into the camera, so I can power my camera using one of these NPF 970 batteries. It lets me shoot all day. I can shoot hours and hours and hours, and then it's super easy to swap batteries out. I used to use like USB battery banks and then just mount those to my rig, and that's okay. It's kind of janky though. This is a much more elegant solution and much more practical. And then I also have this HDMI adapter on the rig because this camera uses micro HDMI, which is terrible. I freaking hate micro HDMI. And so this just bolts onto the rig and gives you a rock solid full-size HDMI connection. That's great for connecting a monitor, for running this to an ATEM. This is great for running into a capture card. Like, this is so much better. This is so much more practical. The cord is really short. It's exactly long enough to reach the camera. So I have it going around this side handle, so that way the side handle offers some protection. I don't have to worry about like the cord or the plug getting bumped or damaged. It's going to protect that port for me. If I look at the top of the cage here, we actually have 2 cold shoes, plus you can still access the cold shoe on your camera. So whatever you need to mount, you got space for it. And then I added this NATO rail to the front, so I could take something like a top handle, tighten that down, and now I've got a rock solid handle that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to wiggle. And then I've got even more mounting points for me to throw a microphone or a monitor or a wireless receiver, whatever I need. And then for monitors, I've really been loving this Godox monitor. This is the GM6S. It's a 5-inch monitor. This thing is freaking great. There's no fans. It's got these 2 heat sinks on the back, but there's no fans. So it's completely silent. You can run it off an NPF battery just like my camera, which is great because all my stuff uses NPF batteries. So I don't need to carry multiple different types of batteries. I can carry the same batteries, the same chargers. All my gear uses it. It's got an HDMI pass-through, so not only can you run an HDMI signal into this, you can run an output. So I could run this into like a wireless transmitter and send a feed to a director or Video Village or something. It's got 5 programmable buttons along the top, so you can customize different tools to that. There's mounting points all over it. This thing is great. And so if I throw that on my rig here, what else is really great about this monitor is you can actually power it over USB-C. And this battery plate has a USB-C out, so I can literally just take a little right angle USB cable, plug that into my battery plate, power this up. So now my camera and my monitor are all powered off of one battery. So this is great. I can just swap one battery throughout the day and I'm good to go. And then again, with this monitor being so small, it's still lightweight. It's still easy to shoot with. It's not going to be super heavy. Monitor also has a ton of really nice assist features. So there's false color, which will take the different luminance values in your image and assign them a different color. So you can see right off the bat what parts of your image are underexposed, what are overexposed. Anything green is going to be your middle gray. Anything pink is going to be one stop over middle gray, which is where you want your skin tones. And so as you stop down or stop up and adjust your exposure, you can see the colors on the screen changing. And so this is super handy for dialing in your exposure on your image. I actually use this all the time. You can also bring up these waveforms. So you have a waveform, a histogram, and a vector scope, which again, just more tools for making sure your image is exposed correctly. There's focus peaking if you're going to do any manual focus, or if you want to make sure your autofocus is hidden where it needs to. You can mat out different markers. So if I want to set this to 235 to 1 and shoot widescreen, I can mat that out on my screen here and see how my framing is going to look. One thing that's kind of weird is if I bring up the menu here, there's tons more features. You can dial all these settings in. Now there is a zoom feature, which lets you zoom in, which is great for checking your critical focus. But what's weird is you can't assign the zoom to one of these buttons. The only way to access it is by going through the menu. So I kind of wish I could just program the zoom to one of these buttons so I could just punch in real quick, check my focus, and then punch out. The fact that I have to remember to go through the menu, that's kind of a pain. That's kind of my only negative about this monitor, is I wish I could just program the zoom to one of these buttons. As far as color accuracy goes, if we use Calman's SDR toolkit to measure this display, if we use the color checker, we can see we're getting an average delta E of 2.2 with a max of 4. Now the lower this number, the better. 2 is kind of the threshold for what the human eye can see. Ideally, you want this under 2, as close to 1 or under 1 as possible. But I mean, out of the box, getting a 2.2 as an average, that's not terrible. That's actually pretty dang good. And if we look at the grayscale, we can see we're getting an average delta E of 2.2 for our grayscale as well. Our RGB balance is pretty good too. It is shifting a little blue, but it's not the end of the world, and it's actually, all things considered, not that bad. And then if we check out our saturation sweeps to see how we're performing there, we're getting an average delta E of 1.8 with a max of 3.5. So out of the box, this thing is performing pretty well. Now one neat thing is if we go into our display settings, we can change our color space from Rec 709 to Origin, and that will unlock the RGB balance controls. So if you wanted to, you could use Calman to do a manual calibration and tighten these numbers up just a bit. That's pretty tedious and time consuming. I'm not going to do all that. I'm perfectly fine with the results we're getting out of the box, especially at this price point. I think right now it's going for around $250. So under $300, you're getting this really fully featured monitor with all these video assist features, and it's pretty dang color accurate. I think that's a steal. The other really cool thing about this monitor is if we check out the bottom here, it's got a DC in and a DC out, which means you could run an AC adapter to this and use it in a studio and power it all day. You could also do that over USB-C. But what you can also do is if I disconnect this USB cable here, you could take a dummy battery, run that into the DC out, take an NPF battery, throw that on the monitor here, and now not only are you powering your monitor, but you can power your camera as well. So you can actually use the monitor as a battery plate to power your camera from the monitor itself. So that's pretty great. That gives a lot of flexibility. That means you don't need to get a separate battery plate. You can just use this. Now I don't know how often I'm going to use that feature. I kind of like having the battery on the plate here because it balances it a bit more. I'm not always going to want to use the monitor, so that gives me the freedom to where I don't need it if I don't want it. But just having that flexibility is great because that means I can throw this on any camera and power pretty much any camera just with this monitor. But this is how I have my Sony rigged up. I've been shooting more and more and more with this rig just because of how convenient it is, how small and lightweight it is. The autofocus on this camera is pretty great. The low light's pretty good. It is only 8-bit, so I only really use this if I'm not going to do any color grading. Anytime I want to do heavy color grading, I'm going to use my Blackmagic rig. But for just simple, quick, down and dirty run and gun shoots, I've been reaching for this 9 times out of 10. This rig just makes it so easy to use. I get so much functionality out of this. It's so flexible. I'm loving how this rig came out. For the way I shoot, where I want to move quick, get in, get my shots, get out, and do a quick turnaround, this has been perfect. So this is my run and gun Sony rig. It's pretty much all small rig parts except for the top handle and the NATO rail. And then this Godox monitor has just been fantastic. Just the video assist features you get, the power options, the fact that you can power your camera off of the monitor, and you can power it over USB, you can power it off of a battery. I love the flexibility this monitor gives you. The quality of the display is really great. And at this price point, it really just can't be beat. So I love this rig. I've been shooting with this more and more. This is my Sony run and gun rig.